I started watching, finished watching Chernobyl.
Aye.
Last week, and I don't know if you've seen it at all.
No, but it all turns out in the end. It all turns out fine, right?
Aye, I mean, if by fine you mean a nuclear disaster that left an entire city and country, in fact, parts of 3 separate countries, a basic fucking wasteland forever.
To this day, it's
Then yeah,
still,
it was basically
it's still
that.
radioactive, is it not?
Yeah, exactly. They've recently, well, I say recently, 2017, I think they say they built. So Chernobyl, yeah, big fucking nuclear wasteland. I was very ignorant before I watched Chernobyl. I did not realise when Chernobyl took place.
I actually
Hands up.
don't know.
You don't know? You're saying you don't know?
No, I actually don't know. When was it?
It was 1984. I was convinced.
Really? I thought it was way before that.
So did I.
What?
I was sitting there going, same as you. I thought it was like the 1920s.
Yeah, I thought it was.
I'm like,
ago.
I'm so fucking ignorant. I'm just gonna drop out because my control's been a dick. But I showed my ignorance a wee bit, being like, oh, it says Batman. It's got a wee Batman symbol on it. I don't know if you maybe can't destroy that.
Yeah,
yet.
but I thought maybe
Because
Joker,
it's Batman.
Joker doesn't go on with Batman, so he'd want to blow up.
Yeah. Sorry, it was the 1980s. Really sophisticated, you know, in terms of like the era that it's in.
Yeah.
Compared to what I thought, you know, there's a lot of science that goes into it. But what's quite good about the show is it really dumbs down the science, in terms of the explanation of what went wrong. So it's like a 5-parter, which I thought was a weird number.
That is a little strange, but.
And it runs through everything from the event kind of taking place, and then it kind of cuts back later on to sort of just before it happening to give you the context of why it exploded. But it keeps it as like a mystery sort of from the get-go, which is really good because it feels like an actual investigation, which obviously it was, you know what I mean, when it kind of went, at first they were all in complete denial about it. Like, no one openly acknowledged that the reactor was exposed and there was a radiation leak. What they were claiming is that one of the water pumps which feeds the reactor had exploded.
Right.
So the building was on fire, but not the reactor was still sound.
Okay.
And it wasn't until police and fire crew and however other many people came to the site, started trying to, like, you know, normal fire procedures, you know, douse it with water, move debris, clear people out. It was only after, like, guys started getting really fucking sick and, like, burns, particularly on things like the hands and the feet, that they were like, how the fuck is, and at first you're like, well, the firefighters, but they're like, no, I didn't touch anything, I was holding a hose. That's when they started twigging that there's something really weird going on here. And it was actually other countries that contacted this sort of Russian government, kind of going, we're detecting radiation, like, in Sweden.
What?
Yeah, like, what the fuck has happened? You know? East Germany is like, again, they came to the sort of Russians going, we've got detection of, like, you know, I can't remember exactly which element it is. It's not like you detect uranium in the air. I can't remember if it was zirconium or iodine you detect in it. You detect some element in the air
that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, exactly. Aye. So it's not like you detect radiation. You just detect elements, and it's because of the decay of the actual uranium. That's what kind of causes it. And so Russians, as you know, are notorious, like, pure secret keepers. Tell you, fucking James and Lily Potter had entrusted a Russian, they'd still be alive today, because they were just fucking climate deniers, just all of that, man. They were just straight up refusing to admit that there was a problem.
Yeah.
Until they got this sort of physicist, well, in the sort of show, it's 2 physicists, but it turns out in reality it was a team of like 40 guys or whatever. Which I thought was a bit cheap. I thought, oh, but all these scientists don't get acknowledged. They're like, oh, we combined all these guys into one character. And guess what? Just name 3 characteristics of this character. Not knowing anything about them, but just knowing the modern state that we live in.
Yeah.
What do you think this character is like?
Wears glasses.
Yes, but I was thinking more personality.
Nerdy.
Possibly, yep. I'll give you a hint. Princess Peach.
Oh, what, like strong woman?
Strong, independent woman.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, she.
Well, there I am. I'm sexist. I assume that the scientists were men.
Clearly.
Well, not because I'm sexist. It's because it's Russia. So.
Well, no, exactly. So it didn't make sense in the context of the time, and there's a bit where she's like, you know, I can't reveal the truth because I know how the world works. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Social commentary, very good.
Aye.
But other than that was the only bit that kind of annoyed me a wee bit. Her character's actually really good. She's actually, I know I'm kind of mocking her a wee bit for being a strong, independent woman, but the actress is actually really good. She plays the part really well, dead scientific, but they also are like investigative as well because they themselves don't understand it, right? So a reactor exploding at the time was theoretically impossible. They're like, a reactor doesn't explode, it doesn't have any combustibles, that's why it was safe energy, so to speak. You know, it's not like with fossil fuels and stuff like that, it's not combustive. But what it is highly powerful, and all the things around it contribute to how a nuclear reactor works. And like I say, they really dumbed down the science. For the big finale where he's explaining in the kind of Russian court what happened. So the first blame point is operator error. It's like what they did is what contributed to the reactor failing, but they also reveal that there is also a fundamental design flaw with the reactors themselves which caused the explosion. But he said, you know, he's like, we can't really say how much each part contributed. Yeah. In reality, when they presented it, it seems very much like it was operator error. Like if they hadn't been operating the reactor the way they were operating it, then it wouldn't have exploded. The design flaw though was the important part from a political standpoint because it was something that wasn't openly reported on, and it was something that if you just left the reactors, it would have led them to explode later on. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not a nuclear scientist, but having had it explained to me, the nuclear reactor works with the reaction of uranium electrons hitting each other at speed.
Yeah.
So to help control that, they have control rods that they raise into and out of the reactor depending on how much power output you want. So there was a few things that went wrong with Chernobyl. The first was they hadn't completed a safety test they were supposed to complete before they commissioned the reactor. So they'd signed the paperwork to say they had, but they kind of had it that we know we need to run this test, because if we don't run this test and there is a failure, it would be deep shit basically, you know what I mean, because they've signed to say this is acceptable.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt that that's the first wrong thing they did. They signed it off. So there should be a verification process, so you can't just sign off a form to say, yeah, I've done all the testing.
Aye.
And shit like that still happens today, you know, where people just sign off things and go, yeah, it's fine, it's alright. It's like, no, you need to verify it.
So then what happens in the end?
Well, they blame one individual for the reactor explosion. They blame like the head engineer, this guy Dyatlov. Which it is kind of his fault, you know. He was actually sentenced to hard labour, and two of the other guys, you know, like the plant manager, and so the guys who had signed off the paperwork to say that the reactor was all good, they were also imprisoned.
Good.
But the science side of thing was fascinating. Like I say, the control rods basically have a defect in them where the tips of the control rod essentially have graphite, which have the opposite effect. So the control rods, I'm going to say are made of boron, but don't quote me on that. But the control rods they stop the reaction. But the tips of the control rods are made of graphite, which actually accelerates the reaction. So what they'd done is, they were trying to get the reactor to a really low power, but they'd actually overshot it. So they'd got the reactor too low on power, so they were trying to get the power back up again. So they'd actually raised all the control rods out of the reactor to the point where the tips were the only thing kind of exposed in the reactor to control the reaction. The test is related to what happens if the reactor were to lose power, is essentially a safety test. So if the reactor was to lose power, there's a delay in the diesel generators coming online to run the pumps for the water that keep the reactor cool. So you'd experience a meltdown if there was ever a power cut. But what the kind of safety test is well, the reactor generates steam, which turns a turbine. So as the turbine's dying, you basically stop the reaction in the furnace, stop the reaction in the nuclear reactor, but then use the turbine as it's slowing down, that last bit of power, to keep the control in place for the water and the pumps before the diesel generators come on, to start the water pumps again. Now, one of the things is that a nuclear reactor, as a byproduct, produces Xenon, which actually inhibits the reaction in the nuclear reactor. What had happened is they were supposed to perform the safety test, and then were told, no, delay it for 10 hours because they can't afford the reduction in power of the grid. So what it meant was that they were running the nuclear reactor at half power, so it was generating more and more xenon, which was inhibiting how much power it could produce. And this is kind of the reaction to that. So the xenon was inhibiting the reaction, water inhibits the reaction, and the control rods inhibit the reaction. So what they'd done is they pulled the control rods all the way out, not realising that the big issue was a build-up of xenon, which burns off gradually. So when they'd lifted the control rods all the way out, they'd also bypassed, by the way, all the computer controls. So there's all these safety controls in place that are automated to stop someone doing dumb shit like this, which is why they're like, no, operator error was definitely part of the problem here.
So they basically did what they shouldn't have done.
Yeah, the computer sent them a printout in the show, and it was like...
One of them just went, that can get taken.
Yeah, basically. It was like, the computer's telling us we need to turn the reactor off. It's like the computer's fucking doing all it can. They've switched off all the safety controls so it can't feed it water, it can't do this. They're doing all this dumb shit. Reactor literally sends them a printout going, please stop. And they just go, nah mate, we're manual override, pulled the control rods all the way out, the xenon burns off. They've started the test, which means there's no water flow. So all of a sudden when the xenon burns off, it's like, it went from say 3600 megawatts to, I think the highest reading was about, 50,000 before it just straight up exploded because there was so much power. It ignited the gases inside the reactor, and that's how the reactor exploded. And it's the explosion and the exposure of the uranium inside which is why Chernobyl's so toxic.
Right. Because it's the uranium that's crazy radioactive.
Yeah, it's not naturally occurring. It had to be...
At all?
As far as I know, no.
Uranium, really?
You have to man-make it. And
that's never good news.
And it's the exposure of two uraniums in close proximity that causes the reaction. And the control rods slow down how fast the electrons move, so that when they hit, they collide, they produce energy. The energy evaporates water, which generates steam, which turns a turbine, which creates power.
Yes.
So, operator error and not defective control rods entirely. I'd say if you're going to put a balance to it, it was 80% operator error, 20% there's a defect in the way these have been designed.
Yeah.
Because it's cheaper to build them with graphite tips than it is to make them fully like boron or whatever the fuck they were made of. So there you go. This is my science lesson for the day.
Never trust Russians.